tape that often gets thrown at projects.
So where are we with that 600 plus billion?
So in Connecticut, everything has been obligated, and then on top, we've spent all 3 years worth of funding, whether it's spending it that year or applying it to future projects that are in design right now.
How much is that?
We $5.38 billion over 5 years, so we've obligated probably around $3 billion so far.
In other words, the bill lets us. Well, does the bill say much money each state gets?
Yep.
Oh, it does.
Yes, it delineates exactly how much money you get.
So the bill say Connecticut, you get 5.38.
5.38.
Is there a time by which we have to spend or obligate it?
Yes. So we have each year has essentially a 5-year horizon to spend that money you get that year. But then we also get competitive grants that we compete for. That it's not delineated who gets those, so we throw our hat in the ring and try and get as much
under the
of that.
Same law.
Yeah.
So we're talking 2 pots of money. So how much did we get that's reserved for us?
$5.38 billion is reserved for us.
And how much of that have we spent or obligated?
We've obligated the full 3 years worth so far, so a little over $3 billion.
Now, why is that 3 instead of 5?
Well, because we haven't gotten the next 2 years yet, because it's a 5-year bill. They give it a certain amount each year to us.
So do we have to meet milestones in order to get the rest of that money? If we're going to do Move New Haven and say it's going to be ready by start construction in 2026, it'd be done by 2029. Do we have to have that construction started in 2026 to get that final tranche?
Kind of. Yeah. So you can't.
Unless you have a good reason.
What we do is we get reimbursed. The federal government doesn't pay us up front. They reimburse us for expenditures. So as we have bills come in, we actually get paid back by the feds. So we'll pay contractors, we'll pay consultants, we'll pay our staff, and then the federal government reimburses us.
So is there any concern that with DOGE and other promises to slash trillions of dollars from the federal budget, that money that you haven't spent already might not ever come? Might we be stuck with half of a bus lane?
Potentially, but infrastructure is a little more secure than other parts of federal government because what they do is it's not part of the general fund necessarily. It's part of its own highway trust fund, and they pre-award it. They basically pre-authorize it, and the U.S. Department of Transportation has that apportioned to our states. So they did the bill. It's 5-year bill. They can't really come in and stop that formula funds that we are by law supposed to be receiving. What the federal government can do is stop doing the discretionary grants, so the things we have to compete for.
So now you're totally positive that on the first round they can't have someone come and say, we're just firing most of the people in this department, we're never getting to your paperwork, we're going to have a new policy on stuff, can't promote alternatives to fossil fuels. You're not worried about any of that? That
can happen. They can eliminate some staffing. It can delay projects. Electric vehicle programs are potentially at risk. But again, some of that is formula based. And so that's already come to the states. We've incurred a legal obligation. We've incurred some bills that they now have to reimburse us for. It's the out years. So starting in 2026, we're going to be renegotiating a new bill with Congress and the administration, and we'll see what that looks like.
For the discretionary? For
everything.
Now, what about the competitive? How much money is at stake for Connecticut there?
So we've received, in just the past 3 years, we've secured around $2.2 billion in discretionary grants. And so we are trying our best to make sure to ink and sign grant agreements locking down that money.
And what's that for?
Most of it's for the railroad. So almost $2 billion for the rail infrastructure program.
Which part? Is it about New York, Metro North, or is it about the state?
It's about the New Haven line. So upgrading the signal system, the overhead power system, the tracks on the New Haven line, the Devon movable bridge, the Walk movable bridge over the Norwalk River, but also the Hartford line. We have to finish double tracking on the Hartford line.
My favorite train is that Hartford train because it's just so chill. And it's the older cars, but they're in good shape.
Yep.
And it's just this quiet, peaceful ride that just kind of feels like not the bustle of the other trains, But not that many people ride it, right?
So we have, I think last year there were around close to 550,000, 575,000 people that rode it.
Or 5,000 rides, right? Rides, not people.
Individual trips, yeah. So it's surpassed what the expectations were when we did launched it. We had to do projections for Federal Railroad and Federal Transit on what we expected ridership would be. We've surpassed what that ridership projections were even with COVID occurring, we're above where we were in 2019.
All right. Now on New Haven line, the question I'm sure you get all the time is 1978, when I ride that line from New Haven, it took me well under 2 hours to get to New Haven. It takes me so much longer. I think you mentioned two of the bottlenecks. Will this work ever get us back to how quick it was to get to New York in 1978?
I don't know if it will be exactly where we were in 1978. So our goal, our plan, is to cut 25 seconds off the time to get from New Haven to Grand Central. That's the plan.
25 seconds?
25 minutes, sorry. Yeah.
I was thinking, oh my goodness.
No.
Well, 5 minutes is a lot.
Yeah, 25 minutes is a lot.
What is it now, about 2 hours and 10 minutes?
Yeah, if you take the local. If you take the express, we're down to 90 minutes. If you take like I think it's 5:35 in the morning into Grand Central.
And that just goes to 125th Street, not even Stanford?
It goes to Bridgeport, Stanford, and 125th.
That's 90 minutes?
Yep.
How many of those are a day?
That's the Super Express, and then there's a couple others that go like 95 minutes.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
And and then the others 2 hours and 10 minutes?
Yeah, the local like that does all the stops is around 210.
So what are you hoping it gets to if it's that 25 minutes off? For the 210 goes 25 minutes off?
Yeah, that's our goal, and that's a few different things. One, it's with doing the improvements to the movable rail bridges, because the bridges are so old. The trains have to slow down to go over them, and to slow down a train, you have to start slowing down really far back, several miles back. So you're losing like several minutes worth of time for each of those bridges that we're going to have to redo. But it's also fixing some of the track geometry to allow higher speeds, and improving the signal system and the overhead power system, which is dated and needs to be upgraded as well.
Was that a competitive grant, or was that part of what we got allotted?
Those were competitive grants.
So we got to still ink those.
Yes.
And when do you hope that would be done by?
End of this year is our goal.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's right. End of this calendar year.
Yes.
So
yes.
you're racing.
We are racing.
Is that because the new administration?
Yeah, and the fear is, there's staff turnover at USDOT, so everything slows down when a new administration comes in, because they have to basically restart the engine. They have all new people in there. Everything's paused. This happened 4 years ago as well. Everything was paused for a few months. No new awards were being inked. We received the grants, but it took a while to get the paperwork through. And so that's what we want to try and avoid. You're
racing. You're going to use all your experience working your way up the bureaucracy. You know how this works. And you're going to try to make sure by December 31st, we have ink deals for, you said, $2 billion worth of work on the New Haven line and the Hartford line. And if that comes through, when do you expect it to be 25 minutes quicker to get to New York?
Probably not till 2035 is our goal.
Will it be in the meantime? Will it be quicker, or would it be even slower while you're doing the work on those bridges?
So you'll see slight improvements that the ridership probably won't notice, right? It's going to be a minute here. It's going to be a minute there, gradually over the next decade. And so it's going to be that gradual drip of improvements. But at the same time, there is going to be time where we'll have some congestion because we're going to have to take tracks out of service to do the work. Mm-hmm. So people are going to notice that. So it's some short-term pain, long-term gain type, adage there, but it's going to be true because there are no detours on the railroad. We can't, like on the roadway, we can shut down the roadway, detour people around. This is our railroad. There's no other detour around it. We have to do the work while the trains are going over it. And then remember, we also have all the Amtrak trains, the Acellas, the Northeast Regionals. We have freight rail going over at night too. So there's a lot of traffic on this railroad.
We're talking to Garrett Eucalitto, who is the Connecticut Department of Transportation Commissioner, the number one guy for transportation in Connecticut, and the president, newly named as of November 1st. He took over of
AASHTO,
the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. You talked about 3 goals in your release. You're going to center safety, which means safer communities through complete streets legislation, safer users, meaning that drivers by not having as much speeding and distraction and data collection, and safer workers to get people to slow down and move over when there's work. How, on a national level, how are you going about that?
So it's through conversations with all of my colleagues. So on the safer communities piece, that's something we're really focused on, is how can we do a better job, identifying that every community is unique. And what I said in the meeting with all of my colleagues, that last day of our board meeting was, Torrington, Connecticut is very different from Torrington, Wyoming.
I didn't know there was a Torrington.
There is, yeah. And there's a Goshen,
which has more people.
Torrington, Connecticut does. But it's they're very unique communities with different needs, but you can still focus on putting safety first. It's just going to look a little bit differently. And
Complete Streets, am I wrong to say that in the aughts, and then the 2010s, New Haven led the state in creating safe streets policy? We got the groups who were worried about people getting run over, driving too fast, more pedestrian-friendly streets, and we have a whole plan that makes a process for getting speed bumps in and all that kind of stuff, roundabouts.
Yep.
So what does that mean as you try to implement that in Connecticut? Are we going to get more of that in New Haven? Or are we going to get more of what New Haven did in other cities?
So it's everything. It's all the above. It's called a safe systems approach. So it's not just complete streets, because we have other roads that are not streets, right? We have interstate highway system, which we can do a lot to improve safety for those users. But on the local roads and on the state roads that run through local communities, we issued a new directive last year, our Complete Streets Controlling Directive, which says that every new project we kick off, start design on, has to include pedestrian improvements, bike improvements, and then as well as transit accommodations and ADA accommodations. So, we're not looking backward. No, we're not stopping everything that's already close to breaking ground or in construction, but it's everything from that point forward. If a designer, an engineer in our bureau or in our department comes forward with a project, they need to have sidewalks, they need to have some bike accommodations, they need to have crosswalks, lighting, things like that. And if they don't, they have to get an exception, a waiver from the chief engineer.
And it's always thing how designs that looked odd to us now become more common. Like where I live in New Haven, Westville, and some other parts of town, you have these seemingly odd configurations where you have bike and walk lanes on the right side of the road. Then you have these planters, and then you have regular traffic. Well, then you have parking on the other side of the planters, and then traffic. I'm thinking by Crescent Street, by Yale Avenue. And do you think that's going to be a design for future, or is that just a shortcut because it costs too much money to have permanent barriers for those bike lanes and pedestrian lanes?
Yeah, permanent barriers are difficult because if you have to adjust the curbs at all, it's not just moving a curb to put in a sidewalk. You have all the drainage in the ground too has to be moved. So all the storm drains. If you're going to shrink the curbs, then you have to dig up every single storm drain, put new pipes in.
Even to put in new, let's say, concrete bike lane dividers?
It depends. I mean, if you just want to put the bollards to protecting the bike lane, you can do that without the drainage changes. But if you want to elevate it at all or expand the sidewalk into the roadway, that's where you run into those issues.
Are we going to see more of those? Is that going to become a common sight?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're looking at where we can do that. We've put we did the short-term quick road diet on El Grasso.
Right.
We've done an elevated raised crosswalk down on Townsend near Nathan Hale School. We're working with the city right now on Fox and Boulevard on some physical changes we can do there.
Yeah. And the Peanut Roundabout, that's my favorite one.
Yeah.
By Yale Bowl.
Yep.
So some of these ideas people clamor for, and then some other people don't like them. They think it's hard on their cars. Have there been any of those traffic calming changes that come under complete street programs that you've seen have unintended consequences and are being re-examined as not what we're looking for?
Yeah, that happens. We will do a project and then we'll get some community members who are pretty upset with it. We haven't undone anything yet.
But in looking forward, is there a design you think worked better than expected and when you thought didn't work as well?
I think some of the putting up temporary bollards to do quick road diets.
Those get knocked over.
They get knocked over all the time.
They've gotten better. I know one because I walk by one every day that was continually getting knocked over, and they seem to have gotten it a little farther.
Yeah, it's a lot of work on maintenance staff to have to go out and change them all the time. And then if we have them in snow season, to go out and remove them for the snow season, then put them back in the spring. That's the type of stuff that makes it difficult. It's good to do a quick fix to slow down vehicles and protect users. But
that was a budget thing in New Haven because that wasn't quick. That took years. But in the end, I thought they didn't have enough money for the concrete barriers. I don't know if it's because of drainage issues you mentioned or just that it cost too much. What's the alternative if you're not going to do these temporary rubber duckies?
We could. I mean, the longer term project. The alternative is a longer term project to actually move the curb out and fill it in. and actually shrink the
and then
roadway.
elevate the bike lane.
Yeah.
So that does involve the drainage, and that's expensive. You can't do as many of them.
Right.
Are you thinking of that for the ones in New Haven that have the temporary bollards?
I mean, we're talking to the city. I know the city has their plan. So most of the streets in the city are local streets, but we have funding availability for the community to apply for. So I know the mayor is really focused on a lot of those projects, and we're looking forward to work with him on what they bring forward. We funded projects in the past year. I know the major roads that have a lot of the crashes and fatalities are state roads, just because that's where the heaviest volume is. That's where there's more people on those roads traveling.
It's at an event where people did a statewide commemoration of pedestrians being struck by drivers. Where are we going with that? Oh, you were there?
Yeah.
What did you take away from that?
I told the survivors and the victims there, continue to hear their voices is important, because I spent a few years now working at the Capitol, and I can bring policy ideas to the Capitol to try and get change, but it's the survivors, the voices of the survivors, or the voices of the victims that really help drive that change.
And what will they help you do?
Try and get some changes. I really am focused. I was able to work with the legislature and Representative Lamar to finally get speed cameras and red light cameras installed. That was, I think, something that we didn't know if we'd ever get it done, but we did. And so there's other things I want to get done. I want to increase penalties for people who are speeding and using their phone. So right now, if you're going over 85 miles per hour, that's considered reckless driving, and it's heightened penalties. If you are using your cell phone on an interstate highway system,
because could that include having it in your console and speaking to it?
No, that's not considered using it. But if you're texting, or something like that,
holding it in your hand,
texting, watching YouTube, watching TikTok.
Oh my God!
I see people do all the time
while they're driving.
That's not considered reckless driving. That's just considered distracted driving. I think if you're doing that on a highway where you're going 65, 70, 75, if we're lucky you're going that slow, then that should be considered reckless too.
So you want to get penalties increased for distracted driving.
Yeah.
And on a local street, you could run over somebody.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And then, on the highways, you can kill people working on the highways. You can kill a cop. You can kill.
So you're looking for increased. So you got the cameras through.
Yep.
Now you're looking for increased penalties for distracted driving, increased penalties for reckless driving. Anything else?
I'm going to make another push, hopefully, to lower the blood alcohol concentration from 0.08 to 0.05, because Connecticut is one of the worst states in the country when it comes to drunk driving.
Really? How do we measure that?
So we are it's measured nationally as a percentage of your fatalities caused by impaired driving.
But what if you have fewer fatalities?
It's still, how do you compare to everyone has the same type of transportation system. They all have drivers, walkers, bikers, motorcyclists, and you have drunk driving, impaired driving, distracted driving, speeding. So of the percentage nationally, we're usually the top 5 for percent of our fatalities caused by drunk driving. And it's it's been proven to work across the globe, and it's proven to work in Utah. And so I want to make another push to raise awareness. People are out there, they're drunk, they're high, or they're drunk and high, and they're killing people.
Does this include marijuana?
Yeah.
Yep. Is there a marijuana test, like a level of marijuana?
You can't measure the level. You can measure whether you're impaired by it. So it involves an officer does what's called a drug recognition expert. A DRE is a trained officer who can determine what you're impaired by. All they know when they pull you over is you're impaired. They do the standard field sobriety test. They don't know what you're impaired by. They just know that you are impaired. And then they take you into custody and then figure out what you're impaired by, whether it's alcohol or drugs. Could your impair sometimes
be, because I don't drive.
Prescription drugs.
I always wonder if sometimes your brain kind of like as you get older, like me, sometimes it kind of worries me when I drive, is that sometimes you kind of lose concentration, not because you've had any substances, but how does that work with distracted?
So that wouldn't necessarily be considered impaired driving. Impaired driving, you'd need to actually fail the standard field sobriety test when they pull you over, and then you don't perform. It's called don't perform it to standard.
You mean like walking a straight line?
Yeah, and all those things. So if they do the eye movements.
And what about tinted windows? I don't know why I have this theory. I see so many tinted windows that's illegal. You can't say who's driving, and they drive worse. What is there any effort? I always wondered, could you do a program where you stood by a detailing place that also does tinted windows and just arrest people as soon as they come out with tinted windows?
I mean,
or is that not right? That's a big problem.
No, it is a problem. What concerns me is when they tint the windshield, which I see. Yeah, I mean that is very concerning to me. That's the law enforcement. I'd love to see law enforcement do some enforcement around that, because tinting the side windows, okay, that's still not legal, depending on the darkness. But tinting the front windshield, that's not safe for anyone. So.
And we're talking to Garrett Eucalitto, the Department of Transportation Commissioner for the state of Connecticut. So one big part of that Infrastructure Act of 2021 was we got $25 million for Move New Haven, which I think over a decade we spent trying to come up with a plan how to make New Haven's transportation system better, especially public transportation. And that $25 million, was that the competitive, or was that just part of our regular?
That was a competitive grant. Yep.
So we want to competitive. And do we have all that set, or do we still have more for that to get approved?
So we have the $25 million. We're going to work to, once we get to a certain point of designing the project, we'll be able to go apply for more federal funds.
Is that one of the ones that you have to rush by year's end before the bureaucrats come in?
Yeah.
So what do you have to rush to do by year's end?
So after you get awarded the money, then you have to ink a contract with the federal government, essentially.
And we don't have that inked yet?
No, not yet, because they want to see certain things completed before we can ink the contract.
So what needs to be completed by year's end?
So we need to have we measure design of a project on percentages. So they want to see us around 15% design of the project. They want to see some of environmental reviews completed.
And how far are we at 15% in environmental reviews?
Close to 15%. We're working with the city on, trying to, because we're going to be using city streets. We want to make sure the city and the state are in alignment on exactly how it will look on the streets. The environmental paperwork is underway. That takes a long time, given National Environmental Policy Act.
So is it realistic that by December 31st we'll have them the paperwork and they will say okay?
Maybe. I'm hopeful.
What's your guess, percentage-wise?
I will say 75% will get it done.
And then what happens if we don't?
Then it just might be slower, which doesn't stop us from doing the work, because we have state funds dedicated to it already, which state funds are being used today to progress the project. So it will just mean that we will take a little bit longer to get the federal funds in hand, which isn't the end of the world. It just, it's frustrating for bureaucrats who have to deal with the paperwork.
But what about the public? Will it slow down the project?
No, it won't slow down the project.
But the train project, you said, would be slowed down if we don't get that money.
That one, potentially, because we're talking about $2 billion, right? We don't have state funds to swap for that right now. So that one is, but the $25 million, we have state funds dedicated to Move New Haven that we're using.
So Move New Haven, a big part of that is these on-street bus rapid transit, where you get one street out at Dixwell Avenue, Grand Avenue, Whaley, Congress, Columbus, and then that'll be just for a fast bus lane, and 18 new stops and 4 elevator covered mini hubs. So that construction would begin in 2026 and done in 2029.
That's the goal. It might be a little bit delayed, depending on how far we progress. In cooperation with the city. We still need to do a few different things before we can go to construction.
It was just in Oakland where they did the rapid bus lanes. They had an unintended consequences. People got so confused of what lanes to be in that they were running over pedestrians. Any thoughts on how we might learn from their experience and how we design it? Yeah. Because it's still a narrow street, kind of. Dixwell Avenue is not a wide street.
Right.
So it's going to be a little tight.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to have to look at. There may be places we don't have a dedicated bus lane because of lack of real estate, if you will. But the goal is to have as much of it dedicated bus lane as possible. And it's definitely learning from our peers who have done this in other parts of the country. I was out in St. Paul, Minnesota earlier this year and looking at their bus rapid transit system, which is on-road BRT, as well as places like Indianapolis and others. So our team is doing a lot of peer exchanges to learn lessons learned from those that did it.
And then what about when Move New Haven started? A lot of emphasis was on scheduling and routes. Is that still in the mix?
Yep. So that is the priority, right? That's when we apply for a federal grant, we have to apply what's called a purpose and need. What's the purpose and need of this? And it was focused on high volume routes that are delayed due to congestion or too many stops. And there's a lot of people who are lacking car ownership. that need to get to where they need to go more quickly to open up.
Right, Whaley and Grand could be a slog.
Yeah. And so, but in the interim, before we do this project, we did expand hours of operation on the bus system here in New Haven. That was part of like an outcome of the study. So we went to the legislature and got funding.
And what about this? I know you said you have too many bus stops. When are you going to move to fewer of those?
That's what we want to wait and work with the city to come up with the plan for this project to go out to the public with before
so we don't have a plan yet on that. What about on scheduling?
Scheduling, we have started making some changes. And most recently, we had some changes to some schedules. I know over on Grand there were some changes, and then there were a few other routes that were altered slightly to address some new
big thing I hear,
businesses.
because I ride it from Westville downtown, so
Yep.
I really love the bus. I think the drivers are nice. I mean, there's one driver who skips the route sometimes, so I'm left out there for a half hour, but in general, they're really nice. The buses are clean. It's a nice ride. I know that for people coming from the valley to and from New Haven or going out to Southern, if you're not going to the Green, sometimes it could take an hour and a half or 2 hours to go like 6 miles.
Yep.
Have we looked at that?
Yeah, we want to look at, can we do some cross-town routes that avoid having to go to the Green? And that's part of what...
You're working on with the city.
Yeah, and we have to do what's called in order to use federal transit funds to that, you have to do a comprehensive analysis of the whole routing system. And so CT Transit, as well as our team, is looking at that. We expanded some new routes, but it didn't do the crosstown routes yet. So that's something we do want to implement.
And the timing is odd sometimes, because I know the routes were originally for when people mostly worked in factories, 8 to 3, 8 to 4. So for that 5:30 to 6:30 time, I find the route I take has a lot more bus service, more frequent in the hours no one's taking it. And then sometimes at rush hour, when I'm trying to get home, it'll be quicker to walk 2.5 miles because they leave out. For some reason, it's like 2 an hour instead of 3 on the 246. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, it could be driver availability or demand on other routes. So it's all one.
Oh, right. They're trying to, so many more people are on Whaley, makes you diverting it there.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And I mean, when we bring on the drivers, right, we're not going to bring them on just for a couple hours in the morning and send them home and have them come back so we bring drivers in for their shift, and then we bring people in later in the day for their afternoon shift. And so people will frequently complain, well, I see empty buses driving in the middle of the day. And that's where we will often slightly reduce service to reduce fuel consumption, but we're still going to have operators out there operating the buses, because what makes people most likely to use the service is to know that it will be there if you need it.
And that's what's so weird about so I find that I can't count on rush hour, but I can count on 2 p.m.
Yeah. And that's the rush hour piece, right? I mean, the traffic causes what we'll call bunching of the buses, where there'll be a delay, and then you'll have 3 at once.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, they are very good buses. Yeah. I think they do a good job. We're talking to Garrett Eucalitto, the commissioner of the Department of Transportation. Your release about becoming the president of AASHTO said that you were the first openly gay president. Why was that relevant?
I was talking to some of my colleagues who knew I was openly gay. Others didn't necessarily know, because it's not something I like,
right. You're doing
talk about every day when I meet with them. People in my agency at Condot knew, because when the governor announced he was appointing me, and then when I was going in for my public confirmation hearing with the legislature, I did an all-staff meeting on Teams to talk to all of them, just to talk about what I plan to talk to the legislature about. And I announced to the whole agency, for those who didn't know, I'm a Vikings fan, I love sci-fi, and I'm gay. And that was, I think, really helpful for other people in the agency who also are, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and who felt they could, the commissioner told people, and I've had people come up since then and say, I told my colleagues I was, because I wasn't sure if it was a comfortable place to tell.
So as a leader, your actions can make it easier for people in the ranks.
Yeah, and I think at AASHTO level, it probably isn't that big a deal, because we have Secretary Pete, right?
Yeah.
But AASHTO's been focused on, we know the transportation industry is diversifying. Several years ago, we had our first woman president of AASHTO. A few years ago, we had our first black president of AASHTO. And so, the AASHTO colleagues were like, hey, you should just, you don't need to talk about it, but just include that so people know, so that, several years from now, we can go back and look and be like, have we ever had a gay president at Astro?
And it's also saying you put in the context of that's one of several ways you could tell what I'm like and who I am.
Exactly.
And I wonder that because one thing that's interesting about your biography is that you've been a real policy person. You've been someone who's been in the weeds. You were U.S. Senate legislative aide. You were undersecretary of the Office of Policy and Management in the state. You were transportation program director for the National Governors Association. You were spent 3 years as deputy commissioner before you became the commissioner of the DOT in January 2023. In that time, has that issue of being an openly LGBT person evolved? Has it mattered in that world of people who make policy like that?
Yeah. I mean, thinking back to when I worked in the Senate, part of the driving reason I ended up in the Senate was because, in high school and early in college, I wanted to potentially serve in the military. I couldn't. I knew it would be very difficult to do so under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So I ended up walking away from, either joining ROTC. And so when I got hired on Capitol Hill, we would have our annual collective of talking amongst our legislative staff with the legislative director and the senator, talk about here are some ideas for legislation we should pursue. And so one of the issues I brought up a couple years in was, hey, you really need to push to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and here's why, and here's what I went through, and so the senator picked it up, and we did it, and so that really helped shape our legislative.
Which senator was that?
Lieberman. So
interesting.
Yeah. So his
and what's
big
interesting
push
to me about that is, so Don't Ask, Don't Tell, if you think I have my history correct, was actually pushed by advocates of LGBT rights because they thought that's the best they could do in a hostile environment that otherwise might get something written in the Constitution or legislation banning. But that in fact, society might have moved faster than that, and that we actually got the gay marriage. And that's, I wonder if a lesson that given in today's environment and the presidential election, not just in LGBT issues, but in general, is that if you can openly embrace what you're for, rather than try to create rules that you could see doing less damage than otherwise would be done by people who disagree with, whether you might actually get to the goal quicker. Like if you openly say, if you're running for president as a Democrat and you said, you know what, I'm okay with transgender rights because we're all people, we love each other, and that's not the business of the government. There'll still be people who don't like that, but instead when you run scared and say, I'm not going to talk about and cede the issue to the other side, I wonder if that might be a lesson of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yeah, I think there were definitely unintended consequences. I mean, through the process of working on the legislation, trying to build the coalition to repeal it, the senator and I met with so many people who either were forced out of the military. We also met with surviving family members of those who committed suicide as a result of the policy.
Oh my goodness!
And that helped really, reinforce for everyone else why this was something we had to get done.
So you're an aide to Senator Lieberman.
Yep.
Because what's interesting about that, I know that he was for some gay rights legislation. He also supported anti-gay rights legislation. Like he was close with Senator Jesse Helms, who banned federal money for counseling gay students that it's okay to be gay if they're suicidal. And Joe voted for that. Do you remember that? I mean, was that all
I got there in 20.
Well, that was in
January
of
2007. So.
Okay, and by that time, society had moved.
Yeah, I know he was. He and I disagreed on gay marriage. He felt it was a religious institution.
But why should the go? Oh, yeah, I'm not gonna argue with you.
Yeah, but then on gays in the military, he was one of those who did not support Clinton's effort to do Don't Ask, Don't Tell because he thought we should allow them to talk about it.
So interesting
because he thought it would hurt unit cohesion. So
people are very interesting. Yeah. And then so you how has your take evolved in general when you've gone through all these policy positions of where we're going in transportation? Can you point to something that you thought about transportation that you think differently today?
Yeah. So when you're working on Capitol Hill or working state budget office, and you have these ideas. But coming onto this side now, inside the agency that actually has to implement policy, I can see how policy ideas are great, but it's much harder to actually implement some of them in practice. And there's so many innumerable reasons why it can be difficult to implement. And so that's been really great for me, is the opportunity to see like how policy becomes practice and how you can implement those.
Can you give an
policies.
example, something that you might say now that you wouldn't have said before?
Yeah. So, I mean, like when I worked for the state budget office at OPM, like we really wanted to try to expand solar and use the rights of way or use some property to have solar arrays to generate revenue that can be offsetting the expenditures of the state. And because the DOT is one of the largest property owners in the state, we have a lot of land. We have a lot of buildings. We have.
So that makes sense for policy person. You're sitting in an office, you say, we got that land, let's put the solar away. So what happened?
So then now I was hired in 2020, came on board. That was the first project assigned to me. We still have no solar on our property because it's not on our fault at the DOT. It's all the other people that are involved. It's the utility companies that are slowing things down. It's the legal contractual agreements. It's the surveys that need to be done.
Well, like I know that with the Farmington Canal Trail, that when we want to go a mile or a quarter mile, so many different property owners, budding property owners have rights that have to sign off on it. One person could hold it up.
There are so many people that need to sign
even tracking
off on
down who even controls
solar.
the property sometimes.
Yeah.
So what do you take from that? What would you do differently, if anything? Or it's just an expectations game?
It's just an expectations game. And it's more about education. So it's about educating people like I used to be about the realities. And it's also working with the legislature, right? The legislature all of the legislators I work with all have great intentions and fantastic ideas for what we can do to improve the state. And I often have to be like the Debbie Downer in meetings to explain why things may not go as quickly. So I'm accustomed to that now, of being that Debbie Downer in the room, or Commissioner Buzzkill. Sometimes I'm called.
Commissioner Buzzkill. Yeah. One thing that struck me about the different perspectives from state DOT, and I think it's changed, but in the Malloy administration, when they came up with the plan to widen the extension of Whaley onto Amity Road, that area down near where it's almost Woodbridge. And it was such a difficult place to drive because so many different streams of cars pour into one place. Yep. And they widened it so much that it's a much easier place to drive now. But they did it in contravention of all New Haven's emerging consensus, which became a terrible place to bike or walk. When you look, and DOT people were so sincere and they were so excited about what a great job they did to get these very difficult stretches like near West Prospect, where you just couldn't park and have cars coming. It'd be so frustrating. And now it was less so. And they thought they'd done a great job, whereas in New Haven, people get a little too upset about transportation in New Haven. They were like, wring your neck because you don't agree. But especially about bike lane, which is kind of funny when you talk about traffic calming. They're not very calm. But, they had an argument that, you just did everything in contravention of how we're trying to get a walkable, bikeable city. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Has the thinking changed since then? So
I think the thinking definitely has changed. It's focused more on safety and mobility for all users of the system. We need to balance all the competing needs. It's not just how quickly a car can go from A to B anymore. Our engineering team does recognize you need to incorporate mobility in all of its forms and ensure that all mobility is safe.
I think of another guy. I had a really interesting conversation the other day with someone who's been involved in public life for decades, and he's a really old school guy. He's pulling up in his SUV, he's a marshal, he's parking in a legal place and complaining about driving from North Haven into New Haven. But we were on State Street, and there was been such an interesting 180-degree turn in policy on State Street. And I'm talking around Bradley as you go down town, the other direction, under the highway. So in the 80s, New Haven decided we're going to make that a faster-moving car area so it could be more like the suburbs. And as a result, Channel 8, WTNH, built a suburban-style headquarters that kept here, and they're very proud of that, and it was very sincere. Now the same people in the same positions, but new generations say we want to undo that, and we want to take some of that land back from the wide lanes, build more housing, make it all for pedestrians. So this guy drives up. He's talking to me and an older woman who she and I very much agree with this stuff. It's the new urbanist idea. And he says, I come from North Haven. It's going to be backed up. People are going to move into those apartments. They're not going to be getting in and out. Channel 8 will probably leave. And we said, the new thinking is you're going to move into those apartments because you want to be in a city where you can actually walk. But there are a lot of people who think like him, and as DOT commissioner, you're actually responsible for both groups. Is it really just the down the middle thing, or is he just policy now just going against that suburban mindset for urban spaces?
Well, I think it is a balance. I mean, so the problem is we don't have any input on land use and zoning, right? That's what drives how people, whether they drive or not. And so that's something where we're trying to constantly balance 169 communities and their land use decisions, and we're trying to play catch up.
Is it fun?
It's the greatest
Is the
job.
job fun?
It's the greatest job.
Why?
Just because of the impact that we're having on every single person in the state every single day. I don't think any other commissioner can say that no matter what, whether you drive, walk, bike, take a motorcycle, whatever, or take the bus or train, we're impacting you. Even if you never leave your house, you get goods delivered, and we impact that too.
And am I right in assuming that you've always enjoyed policy and that it's exciting to work your way up to this national position for policy, state position for implementation? Is it a dream job?
Yes, it's a dream job. I love policy, and this is able to implement policy.
Well, keep dreaming, man.
Thank you.
It was so nice to meet you.
Thanks.
Thanks for making time, and good luck on all the great projects. Good luck in those deadlines.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on here. Thanks for listening today. Thanks to Harry Jarose, the best station manager I can imagine any multiverse. Thanksgiving, folks, is coming up. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Listening to Alice's Restaurant, a lot of people. Alice herself just died. There was a great obit on her in the New York Times the other day. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all week long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.